I'm going to failure. I'm taking it there to level 4. All right, so in today's video, I'm going to talk about the best rep range for muscle growth hypertrophy. Now, I'm going to be using a bit of science literature to begin with, basically some scientific research, what the science says, and then I'm going to apply my own practical feedback from training clients, training myself, you know, just being in the gym, talking to people and finding out their experiences and just going back and forth with a couple gym goers and basically just anecdotal, practical, in real life application too. And hopefully by the end you can extrapolate whatever you need to and go about your business. So just jumping straight into the science, we're looking at this meta-analysis, which basically just means a bunch of studies were reviewed, were analyzed. First of all, I want to point out the obvious. I think it's commonly known by most, or guessed anyway, but in this study, higher loads did lead to better strength gains than lower loads, which in this study, low loads was equal to or less than 60% of their 1 rep max, and then high loads was greater than 60% of their 1 rep max. And also, it's not primarily exercise dependent. So this means you can use any rep range for any exercise within the 5 to 30 rep range, as long as you're getting to or near momentary muscular failure, and you'll be completely fine in terms of hypertrophic or muscle, or from a muscle growth standpoint. Also, I want to throw in this study too and mention that even up to 40, if 40 reps was fine if you're considering volitional failure. I'll straight up say it now, I think anything more than 15, 20 reps is just excessive. And I'll go ahead and even say that applies to about 99% of people. Just a quick mention on this too, because I know this video is about rep ranges, but honorable mention to rest timing. I'm just going to throw in this study. I don't want to say too much, but basically just making sure you're resting enough between sets. So in this study, it was about 3 minutes, and 3 minutes being better than 1 minute. So just quick mention, not going to touch on that too much because I can delve a bit deeper into that. Let me know in the comments below if you'd like a video on that. But yeah, moving on. And so circling back to the high reps versus low reps, we've established that it doesn't really matter as long as you're kind of pushing yourself to some sort of failure. You're just basically exerting some effort. However, I think it's important to mention that the fatigue generated from both will differ. So a bit of a practical takeaway, if you want to be optimal, you have to think about the stimulus to fatigue ratio. So kind of self-explanatory, but how much stimulus you're getting compared to the fatigue. So if you're pushing yourself near to or to failure at 30 reps, it's going to be stimulating, yes, but not as great as if it were 10 reps near to or to failure. So hopefully that makes sense, because basically the most important thing when you're pushing yourself is the last 5 reps. So they say that the last 5 reps is the most stimulating. So if you're doing 10 reps, like the first 5 are kind of warming you up to get to the last 5 to where you're pushing yourself. What I'm trying to say is, if you're doing 30 reps and it's near towards failure, you haven't really started pushing yourself until you're on like the 20 something rep. Whereas if you're doing a set of 5 or 6, you're essentially recruiting all the motor units straight away. You're basically pushing yourself from the get-go. So for that reason, I like to program the most of my work in the 4 to 9 rep range. And to be completely transparent, like right now, I'm doing most of my work within that 5 to 7 rep range, rarely touching 8. And this will have a superior stimulus to fatigue ratio, according to the science anyway, due to sets being performed with greater than 10 repetitions having higher central fatigue due to afferent feedback by the musculature lasting longer in duration, resulting in worse motor unit recruitment in subsequent working sets and greater muscle damage, which is not necessarily a good thing. So in layman's terms, doing more reps can lead to more fatigue and less effective workouts, which is not going to be ideal for maximizing muscle growth. Having said that though, another practical takeaway is I do like programming something like a lateral raise or a rear delt fly in something more like the 7 to 10 rep range, as it feels better on my joints. And to add on to this, I would also recommend sequencing exercises by priority, as fatigue is cumulative. So later exercises in the session will have a smaller hypertrophic effect. And I do want to touch on training to failure and intensity a bit more literature on it, as I think it is very relevant to this video. So in this paper, training to failure resulted in greater muscle gains, although authors say they are unclear as to why that is, as we know that training to failure results in greater fatigue, and fatigue is of course associated with worse gains in future sets. Whereas this one found no significant difference between failure training and leaving a couple reps in the tank. However, both papers mention that when using heavier loads, you don't need to train to failure to maximize muscle gains. For example, heavy loads like 4 to 6 reps, you can likely leave 1 rep in reserve and that will be likely enough to maximize muscle gains. Whereas lighter loads, failure training is likely needed to maximize muscle gains. And they suspect that because of motor unit recruitment. So when you're doing heavier loads, there is no delay in recruitment of larger motor units. And we know, previously mentioned, that higher reps basically causes more fatigue and muscle damage. So in that sense, heavy loads are superior. So most of, if not all of your work should be in the 4 to 9 rep range, unless of course you have preferences, discomfort or injury. In addition to this, the papers do mention that further research is absolutely required to find out the likely effort needed to elicit the best maximal hypertrophic response. And I would say also we do have to consider that beginners can grow very well from reps far away from failure. And also, I want to say that most people in the gym, a lot of gym goers don't even near accurately gauge how intense they're really going, like how close they are to failure. So definitely keep a note of that, as a lot of the results will be skewed due to this. So in conclusion to this, based on the current data and what I think would be best for fatigue management and maximizing muscle gains, I'd say have most of your work, like 3/4 of it, in the 2 to 0 reps in reserve, and then 1/4 of it being failure, with the sweet spot being 1 rep in reserve. Once again, the goal being to minimize fatigue, damage, and maximize gains. If you're introducing a new exercise, maybe keep it at 2 reps in reserve for the first week, as new exercises will cause greater muscle damage since your body won't be neurologically adapted to it yet. I personally do a bit more failure work just because I find it enjoyable, but that's just my recommendation. Keep in mind that means more, or should I say less, than 0 reps in reserve. So partials by default basically, which can be beneficial for hypertrophy but certainly won't always be worth it. This is not only because of the acute fatigue cost, but also the greater amount of muscle damage that is associated with them, since you are spending more time dumping great amounts of intracellular calcium ions into the cytoplasm of the active muscle fibers, basically more fatigue. So if you are going to train to failure and thus use lengthened partials, I would say to do so sparingly and where you can fail safely. That's important to keep in mind too. And then secondly, I'd also throw in and say that it'd be better for final sets on isolation work, as it'd be, once again, less fatigue. So I hope this helps. In general, I wouldn't overthink it. Just keep most of your work in the 2 to 0 reps in reserve, with some of it being to failure. Unless you like it, of course, then be my guest, do more, while focusing on progressive overload. Me personally, I'm gonna go hard. I'm gonna take it to failure and then some. So, if I'm doing 3 sets, let's just put it out there. If I'm doing 3 sets, then I'm basically going, let's say 2 reps in reserve, 1 rep in reserve, and then my final set, I'm going to failure. I'm taking it there to level 4. And partials, all of that stuff. But that's just me. That's just how I like to train. And I feel like a lot of these studies don't really take into account if you've been training 5, 10, 15, 20, your whole plus years life. A lot of these studies are like 8 weeks, and it doesn't really take into account if you're, let's say you're training 4 times a week and you're, doing hard cardio and you're super fit. It's not really taking that person into account. There's so many factors, I think, but it's still good to throw out there. Anyways, drop a comment if you have any questions, and be sure to like and subscribe for more fitness content. Catch you in the next one. I am out. Peace.